good jams. I'm more and more I appreciate that playlist, I think, every single fucking day. Hello, everyone. I hope all of you are well. Welcome to the Quarantine Collective's ongoing reading of Nietzsche and the Vicious Circle from our friend Pierre Klossowski. Sorry for taking off a week last week. It's been a weird 2 weeks. It's been a very weird 2 weeks. Surreal, in fact. But good, but surreal. I'm not going to get into everything that's been going on because most of you who probably are watching have some awareness of Operation Inflation and all the other weird, dumb, stupid shit that's happening. But it's just been a lot. So I'm excited to get back to what is one of my favorite books that I've read in years. And I want to get to this part because this is kind of where we start building up, where Klossowski is building up a lot of his theses, his ideas, his foundational work that will allow us in section 3, where we start talking about the eternal recurrence, the vicious circle, and how it operates. These are the groundworks of those elements. So I'm just very excited about that. It's been a while to get to this point, but we're starting to actually get to the point where things matter. And it's really fun. This is one of those readings that there's 4 of you and there's no one in Discord. 0 people in Discord because people are still sleeping on it. Summoning Salt. No, he's a video game guy. There's a lot of people with salt in their fucking name in YouTube. Too many. The Nietzsche salt guy put out a video on Nietzsche and the Vicious Circle that's fine. But this is a book a lot of people sleep on and then get very excited about and then ultimately don't spend the time with to understand how absolutely wonderful it is. Because it is, by the way, absolutely fucking wonderful. So to do that, let's make our way over to the actual reading. Last reading, the last in this series, we were spending a great deal of time going through how Klossowski's talking about the nature of the difference between the impulses, the unconscious, and the preconscious, the more cognitive mind, the experience that we have. The way that he's talking about these things is as the depths of the impulses themselves, but he's talking about them as a different category, a different kind, different in nature wholly than what comes perhaps after that, what is within the social sphere. What he's getting at, and this is the stakes of what Klossowski's been pushing for, is that the depths actually are of such a different kind, they actually don't enter into communication with the conscious mind. That's not what it does. That there's actually never an exchange of energy, ideas, concepts. There's not an exchange that happens there. That instead, the power of institutional elements is entirely illusory on this. The impulsive system that is at the base of things is radically outside of everything. It's untouched by the social system, by sovereign systems. It doesn't affect it. It's still going. Its impulses are still dragging in and out. And even if it comes out and it seems to come out as codes or everyday simulacra or communications from compliant conscious subjects, it is coming out in a way that it itself has not entered into exchange socially. This means that the political subject, which is the conscious self, and the impulsive elements are of different kinds and completely breaking apart. This is completely different than a lot of these other guys. We happen to be reading the 4th chapter of Anti-Oedipus alongside of this, and it's very easy if you're paying attention to see how these things sort of come together, how these things play together, and how they're talking a lot about the same stuff. A lot of the same stuff. So we're going to make our way to the next little bit here. We finished this paragraph. It's the next little bit that we have to go through. And we'll make our way through. Yeah. The last line of the previous, I just want to like hammer home because it's just so great. So no BWO, we'll get there. Chapter 3. This is the ways that these things cross over. I think this ends up being a great way to discuss how the BWO operates, what it is, how it works, and the incredibly important.
Now recording.
There we go. And the incredibly important nature of it, I think Klossowski's bringing out. And I know, August, I don't ever at for readings. Never. So we'll make our way through. But the last line. We have no need to retain the greater part of this code, for the simple reason we will never give up anything whatsoever of our own depth. The kind, the category of the depth, the impulses, we never give anything up for. We never go into communication with. It stays. It is there. And it is not coexisting or talking to. The unconscious doesn't become sublimated into something more. The unconscious stays the unconscious. And then we have the conscious. And this is a break. There's a break between them. And that's a big deal as we get going. So just be paying attention to that. But we'll get reading. Let me know if the audio gets all fucked up at some point. It should be pretty good. The more we hold our depth in reserve for use at the proper moment, the less we penetrate into our depth. A superfluous precaution. In effect, our depth is unexchangeable because it does not signify anything. Because of this unexchangeability, we cover ourselves with the blanket we call understanding, culture, morality, all of which are based on the code of everyday signs. Beneath this cover, there would be only this nothingness, or this depth, or this chaos, or any other unnameable thing that Nietzsche might dare to utter. We're about to get to a lot more Nietzsche in a second, which is fun, but I just want to make sure that we get through this piece by piece, because there's a lot of really good lines here. The more we hold our depth in reserve for use at the proper moment, the less we penetrate. When we talk about holding back our passions or our impulses, when we talk about, this is like Goethe, this is like a Heidegger's idle talk. The way that he's talking about how we have decisive moments, how things show up, how things come through. That the idea that there is a rationality that is sort of holding back and controlling things, and that the depths of our passions are something we must reserve, is something that is really in a lot of, since Nietzsche, but prior to Nietzsche, huge amount of writing done in this, a very puritanical sort of mentality when it comes to sort of that internal drives or the passions, and how, no, the passions must be held at this right time. Freud, for example, extensively talked about this. This is the nature of sublimation. The nature of libidinal desire can't just be freely let out. You have to be carefully watching it, and you have to be holding on to it, controlling it, and letting it show up in various times. And like, no. And he's like, no. He's basically talking about how this is almost self-defeating, because the more we hold our depth in reserve for use at a proper moment, the less we penetrate into it. Because again, they're not in communication. The unconscious and the conscious, we're holding on and we're reserving. You're not going into your unconscious doesn't work like that. You're not actually in communication with it. You're not in exchange with it. That's the line, a superfluous precaution. In effect, our depth is unexchangeable because it does not signify anything. Depth is not related to desire here necessarily, unless you're using it in the Deleuzian term, Estelle. But this is like the unconscious, the impulsivity, the forces, the depth, pre-personal, pre-signification, pre-concept. But this would be, in that sense, this is the chaosmosis for Guattari. This would be Deleuze's libidinal desire in AO. This is the machinic unconscious. This is the depth of that. Our depth is unexchangeable because it does not signify anything. Again, just like in AO, actually. But it's, again, pulling in the economic metaphors, which he's been using a ton through all of this, for good reason we'll come to later. Because what he's really playing with here is the idea that there is no signification, no meaning, there's no whole bodies, no directed personal desires inside of this. This is, that's basically it. It's beyond structuralism. It's beyond any of these things towards total non-signification is what he's talking about here. The depth is unexchangeable because it does not signify anything. And because of this unexchangeability, we cover ourselves with the blanket we call understanding, culture, morality, all of which are based on the code of everyday signs. This is very Nietzschean. This is the idea of the protective fictions, I think, is the term he uses, which is the blanket that Klossowski's calling out here. Comforting, concealing, hiding, protecting, the idea of protective fictions, the way Freud talks about civilization as a defense mechanism. This is that thing that we're talking about. We wrap ourselves in the code of everyday signs, the semiotics of the world we lay on top of it. We put on top as these stories and protective fictions that keep our underlying sort of chaos or the things underneath safe, I guess. And I'm putting that in big fucking quotes. Safe, right? Beneath this cover, that's the protective fictions, there would be only this nothingness, this depth, or this chaos, that's why I say chaosmosis, or any other unnameable thing that Nietzsche might dare to utter. It's just a great line. I'm not sure I can even add to it. I don't think I can even add to it. It's just very, very crisp and very much just putting it together. The point of this is talking about how we have the layer of the semiotic, moralistic, civilizational structures, and then we actually have that almost covering over this other layer. And this other thing is unnameable, chaos. The phrases, the depth, the nothingness, or unnameable things Nietzsche might dare to utter. Nietzsche really plays with these things. The depth, the nothingness, or so if you're going to be listening to YouTube, it's going to be tougher. Sorry. If you want to chat, though, you're free to. Just mute me on YouTube. YouTube's like way behind. It's always a few seconds. Oh, you clicked the wrong thing. Fair enough. So that's the basics of what we're going to be talking today, is actually answering this and then going into some Nietzschean quotes that sort of explain this at large. If everyone's good with that, I'll just keep bouncing on through. Excellent. Why then did Nietzsche so insist on the unconscious that he sought an aim and a meaning in it? And why, on the other hand, did he reduce consciousness to nothing more than a means to this end, to this unconscious meaning? Once again, he did so in order to make use of language, the language of science and culture, to answer for what he had received or thought he had received as the last link in a long tradition. The suppression of the true world was also the suppression of the apparent world, and also entailed the suppression of the notions of consciousness and unconsciousness, the outside and the inside. We are only a succession of discontinuous states in relation to the code of everyday signs, and about which the fixity of language deceives us. As long as we depend on this code, we can conceive our continuity, even though we live discontinuously. There's a better way to phrase that, I'm sure. But these discontinuous states merely concern the way we use, or do not use, the fixity of language. To be conscious is to make use of it. But how could we ever know what we are when we fall silent? It's a poetic little turn of phrase at the end there. Jesus. So Nietzsche did assign stuff and a goal in a way, or talk about it. And Deleuze does too. So does Guattari. There's the connection for them. The sort of will to connection, you could say, the unpersoned sex that they talk about is, desire machines connect and disconnect. But there is a thrust towards connection. For Nietzsche, it's the will to power, the will to overcome, the will. And these things are unconscious, but there's nothing there. What is it? Why did he write like this? And that's the phrasing. It's a interrogation of this fundamental tension in Nietzsche's philosophy, because he critiques teleology. He says that there's this bullshit around saying unconscious drives are more honest or more anything else. But he also says that they are more honest. So he fucks with this stuff. He plays with it, and Nietzsche does this all the time. This is this like self-referential critique to pull out this tension. This is the will to power. This is what Nietzsche's talking about, but Klossowski's really playing with. And again, as it goes on, once again, he did so in order to make use of language. Remember, he wasn't a philosopher. He was a philologist, which is probably not what they called them. His thing was a language. That's what he spent his time studying, is the language of things, how people talked about him and how that changed, how language functioned. That's in order to make use of language, the language of science and culture. This is Nietzsche's thing, right? That's what he did, even before he was doing anything that we know of as really Nietzsche. This is what he was playing with. And this is the thrust, the last link in a long tradition. This sort of thing he was playing with, shifting towards the end of what was the way philosophy and philology was taught. He's kind of anticipating the end of the end of history, the end of philosophy kind of thing, and how that philosophy there's fundamental changes that are going to be coming about. And that's what Nietzsche brought about, really. And he says here, the suppression of the true world, Nietzsche's unconscious or the forces, was also the suppression of the apparent world, and also entailed the suppression of the notions of consciousness and unconsciousness. This is a really weird sort of turning over itself, but it's a really interesting phrasing. If we suppress the true world, the unconscious, and we suppress what it is and how it works, and we assign it a whole bunch of different things, like what Freud would come to do or what was happening prior to that, we're also actually doing suppression of the apparent world. And this also entails, almost by necessity, the suppression of notions of consciousness and unconsciousness themselves, the outside and the inside. These things come together. This is the true world Nietzsche talks about in Twilight of the Idols, which I think we have a reading for, or we just finished one in the QC, discord.gg/DGQC. I think we finished it, or we're about to. How the true world became a fable. Is this huge sort of history of how the metaphysics of the West overcame itself. And the idea, in short, as Klossowski's running with it here, is that if we have the true or apparent, that distinction, the true versus the apparent, the abolishing of this collapses all these sort of dependent binaries that are about that set up the consciousness, unconsciousness, specifically the interior, exterior, This is the truth or the apparent, that which I see that is wrapped around it. I'm looking at a thing, the apparent, but there's the truth of it, the spirit inside of it, you might say, in the Heideggerian sense. He's like, the moment you do away, all of these things collapse. The entire thing becomes what Deleuze calls, and will go on to call, the univocity of being, that there is a single plane of eminence that doesn't have transcendent principles that sort of set it up, or some larger truth. And as Klossowski's talking about it here, there's this sort of cascading, continuous suppression of things, which I would say repression. The Freudian term Aufbung. I will never pronounce that correct. Apologies. But it's not just a simple negation of things. That's not what Nietzsche is doing here. But it is a movement away from it in a different way, where it's stepping away, sidestepping the entire conversation, and instead talking about it as things that are not operative, playing in a different sort of sense. And that's where he goes on with this when he says, we are only a succession of discontinuous states in relation to the code of everyday signs, and about which the fixity of language deceives us. This is, if there's a way to bring like human Deleuze directly into this conversation, that's the moment. That saying that Klossowski just is like a fucking poet, how simply he puts things. It's so good. The form of the good is the most eminent. No. There's no, the form of the good. I don't even know what that necessarily means. That's a whole other discussion. But for this, we have basically, the way that linguistics works and language works. Deleuze in Logic of Sense talks about, one of my favorite examples, which is, the way that language presupposes a continuity. If I say Alice grows larger, Alice eats, grows larger, drinks, grows smaller. That thing that's happening is not happening now. Instead, it presupposes an ongoing process, because in order to think that Alice is growing larger, I have to take Alice as she is now versus what she was a moment ago and what she will be in a moment. And those things, as I'm presupposing that all of that is about continuity, I've actually created a continuity in the way language works by talking about Alice growing bigger. Because Alice does get bigger. She was smaller. She was smaller than she is now. Now she is larger than she was a moment ago. And that conversation is about the fixity of language and how it deceives us, because it makes us think that there is a single Alice that has gotten larger and is actively getting larger. But there's no way to take a snapshot of Alice where she is getting bigger. You're free to show me that camera. I've never seen a photo snapshot that does that, or a single point of measurement. It always necessitates multiple points. This is, and we do this consistently, again, to just talk about logic of sense a moment. When we're talking about how a scalpel cuts skin, a scalpel is cutting the skin of a patient. It is just as easy to say that the skin of a patient is dulling the scalpel of the doctor. Those are equivalent descriptions of the same moment, but they have drastically different meanings. It's a complete shift in terms of how understanding that language creates a fixity, a totality, a break of things that forces us sort of deceptively to consider everything, as a totality, as what we're going through as being every day. This is, Hume's got this critique at the base level of this, because for him, personal identity is a sort of, this weird ongoing shift and changing thing. It's never consistent. And for Nietzsche, very much that's the direction. But the way Klossowski phrases here is just so fucking great. And it's just really fantastic, just very tight. And it's going to be the rest of this. That's the sentence. We are only a succession of discontinuous states in relation to the code of everyday signs, and about which the fixity of language deceives us. There is nothing about you in actual existence that is continuous. There just isn't. You are being succeeded by a discontinuous state every moment, all the time, in relation to the codes of everyday signs that lay over this, and that fixity of that language, that language doesn't change, and what that language is referring to seems to be stable, tricks us into thinking that's the case. And the semiotic structure sort of builds that. And that's this last little bit where they're talking about here, where it says, as long as we depend on this code, we can conceive our continuity, even though we live discontinuously. But these discontinuous states merely concern the way we use or do not use the fixity of language. To be conscious is to make use of it. This is like a very practical theory of consciousness, because the idea that linguistic practice is actually the center of it, instead of being substantially a thing itself, that the language we use is what consciousness is kind of a really interesting thing to consider. And it's like a weird paradox, right? Like, there is a conceptual continuity, but there is a lived discontinuous sort of nature of things. And that's kind of what Nietzsche is doing, is he's shifting the conversation away from like transcendental categories into the linguistic itself. And the idea is that consciousness is not a given or a thing that is ongoing, but instead, how would I phrase it? Instead, it's iteratively constructed through linguistic practice, and we find our consistency there. And he ends with the line, but how could we ever know what we are when we fall silent? And it's really like, if we're not talking, if we're actually not speaking, if there is no words to attach to, what we are in silence, and he means not just not speaking, but that there's no language, you're not thinking words, you're not going through that. In silence, what are we? Would it differ categorically from the linguistic self? Yes, by the way. But it's, what are we when we fall silent is like such a Zen fucking koan line for this. But that's what he's aiming at. He's aiming at that thing where it's like that thing we can't fully know. Now, we're going to be getting through a handful of Nietzschean lines here. And I'm going to kind of, I don't want to say plow through it, but that's probably close to what I'm going to end up doing. Because I'm not here to teach Nietzsche necessarily, but I'm going to kind of talk about how these lines reference back, right, to all of these, if that's good with everyone. Before I go on, does anyone have questions or thoughts or anything where we're at? Get this saying, there is only becoming, but do you completely reject Kantian problematic? Isn't this just dogmatic metaphysics? How would this be dogmatic metaphysics? It's eliminating metaphysics as a category. Do I completely reject the Kantian problematic? That would be a longer discussion. Not quite sure how that would tie in here. It's a completely different discussion. That's kind of the point. I don't want to get into Kant. I really don't want to go down this. I understand, Estelle. Kant's really interesting. I recommend reading Kant, especially if you're going to be getting into Deleuze, because it's necessary. I think Kant is actually necessary for most Western thinkers. A lot of people don't understand that Kant is like super, 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 super important. Even if it's how they're critiquing him or how they're using him, he's incredibly, incredibly important. It is still making claims about the structure of reality in itself. Yes-ish. It's a more complicated thing than saying that, though. So here's the challenge. Going down the road of Kant, I think could be useful here, but it's not useful to the point Klossowski's making or anything. It's an interesting conversation in and of itself that really is actually worth having. And again, Kant is really worth reading, especially for Deleuze and for Klossowski, and I think for Nietzsche as well, as much as Nietzsche doesn't say Kant inspired me, but he's responding to major traditions around things. And he's, So the idea is to try to explain it. Maybe it's worth taking a minute before we get into like just reading Nietzsche, because the Nietzsche reading is, again, just in support. So the question is mostly if Nietzsche is saying that there is only becoming, right? And Nietzsche very much does, and obviously the readers and people I've read afterwards. He's doing what he's accusing the people in the metaphysical space, the metaphysics space of doing, that it's a universal claim about what is real from a perspectivist position. So it's it's not far from, it's a more intelligent and good version of, it's a correct version of the, oh, so you don't believe there's any truth. So you're saying there's no such thing as truth, yet you don't believe in truth? I am very smart. It's that kind of thing, like mocking it's, hey, that's a weird paradoxical thing you're doing here, right? It's a bit of a logical fallacy. It's a universal claim from a perspectivist, right? And it's a fair critique. The point, I think, is that the tension is intended. Like, this is the problem is, and Klossowski will be going into this, but the whole point of what Nietzsche is doing and how he's talked about it is he actually never really says that there is only becoming. What he's doing and talking about is he's talking about how our conception of being actually arose only from practical needs, that it is becoming. This doesn't mean that there was, as far as Nietzsche is concerned, there really wasn't becoming prior to even slave society or those other things, right? So there isn't in him and what he's doing, even though it seems on the surface that's the case, he's actually not just doing that. He's not just doing a dogmatic sort of position, as far as I read him. And again, this is, take it for what it's fucking worth, which is probably nothing. But when we're talking about these things, he sounds like he's making metaphysical claims. But what he's actually doing is, if you take him like directly at face value, is he's talking about particular contingent versions of it. And he never really says, like, this is the truth of all humans, all time, for all beings. But instead, he's talking about it in terms of the sort of genealogy of morals, or how we moved beyond good and evil, and these things that happened in time contingently. And so it's, right? So this is kind of how the whole point for me is kind of that he actually leaves that tension there. That's how I read it, reflective. I mean, it may be a cop-out, but he's not making claims about the structure of reality itself. He's making claims about the structuration of reality in contingent times. And that their entirely other positions and other social systems would have entirely other structuration. And entirely, like, it's entirely different things. It's almost inconceivable for where we're at. That's how I read it. So I think he leaves the tension there intentionally. And it's a thing that people are still discussing. This is an opinion thing. Nietzsche never answered this question, nor did a lot of other people, I think, very satisfactorily. I think people either, like, I think Deleuze went with it and went, yeah, good, and ran with it. And just went, yeah, this is fine, and like left the tension there because the tension is part of it, as I read it, at least. But yeah. Yeah, it's not, yeah, exactly. It's not an explicit contradiction. It's, to use a Hegelian term that I love, it's something that has to be tarried with. You have to allow it to be there. Right? Like, you have to allow it. And if you don't kind of grasp that this is happening, like, you're kind of missing the point, which is fine. It's not a simple conversation to see at all. And on August, I think nails it. The tension further proves the point that Nietzsche is making, which is, again, I think what makes it really interesting. For me, at least. Makes it really interesting. So I think it's cool stuff. Time for some Nietzsche. So, as always, Klossowski has been utilizing Nietzsche's own writings and his life, presuming that what Nietzsche's writing about is his actual lived experience. So, in order to bring out these points that he's making, he is going to be taking from a section here of Nietzsche, which is, I want to say this is Will of Power, but there's a few things this could be from. Does anyone recognize it directly? I'm not going to look at the footnote. I never look at the fucking footnotes. But this is one of the weirder ones. This is not Beyond Good and Evil. This is one sec. Let me look in the fucking back of the book. I have my PDF up. This is Nachlass, I think. It looks like. Which is his notes and other things. So this will be fun. Let's get to it. If we wished to postulate a goal adequate to life, it could not coincide with any category of conscious life. It would rather have to explain all of them as a means to itself. Any genuine telos of life here has to transcend conscious categories rather than be derived from them. If we wish to postulate a goal adequate to life, it could not coincide with the category of conscious life. This is the magnificence of life, the thing that it is, the power of it. This is, I mean, we were just talking about Kant, like this is the move. This is the thing where he's like, the life can't be reduced to these categories. That'd be shitty to do to life, more or less. And then he goes on. The denial of life as a name of life, as a name of evolution, existence as a great stupidity. Such a lunatic interpretation is only the product of measuring life by means of consciousness, pleasure and displeasure, good and evil. Here the means are made to stand against the end, the unholy, absurd, above all unpleasant means. How can an end that employs such means be worth anything? But the mistake is that instead of looking for a purpose that explains the necessity of such means, we presuppose in advance a goal that actually excludes such means, i.e., we take a desideratum in respect of certain means, namely pleasant, rational, or virtual ones, as a norm on the basis of which we posit what general purpose would be desirable. I'm just going to go through, we'll just make our way through this. This is, I think, mostly, yeah. The fundamental mistake is simply that instead of understanding consciousness as a tool and particular aspect of the total life, we posit it at the standard and the condition of life that is of supreme value. It is the erroneous perspective of a parte ad totum, which is why all philosophers are instinctively trying to imagine a total consciousness, a consciousness involved in all life and will, in all that occurs, a spirit, a God. But one has to tell them that precisely this turns life into a monstrosity, that a God and total sensorium would altogether be something on account of which life would have to be condemned. Precisely that we have eliminated the total consciousness that posited ends and means is our great relief. With that, we are no longer compelled to be pessimists. Our greatest reproach against existence was the existence of God. Hey, we use consciousness, that thing that we have developed through very particular conceptual, contingent, social, and large-scale interactions, and that because we've got language that focuses on that, and because of that, which we value and gives us these words, we now take that as more than just a tool in particular aspect. It is the standard. It is the truth bearer of everything. Everything starts with the idea of that. This is something I think you can see in a lot of, not just philosophers, but popular versions of how people view the world. The soul in religion, for example, that conscious thing that you've got, that you're experiencing the world from, you now review the world through that lens, as if it is the center, as if it is the thing, as if it is what all things need, or is the conditions of life, that it is the supreme value. Don't do that, basically. This is super big shots at Schopenhauer. Yeah, absolutely. This is a very big Schopenhauer. Well, it's not even just Schopenhauer. This is like Kant. This is Aristotle. This is a lot of the guys of his time. And this was written in 1888, so it's contemporaneous with a handful of other people that were publishing that he, I think, is taking aims at, if I had to guess. Ish. Well, this is like from his Antichrist era, so this is that's the thing, right? That they're sort of aiming at. The last bit, our greatest reproach against existence was the existence of God. Theodicity itself is the scandal. It is the bad thing. It's not evil. Like the Western systems, as they've sort of existed, have always put God as like the best thing for existence, or the proof for it, right? But he's kind of structured a funny argument here that's basically like, well, if God exists and he allows suffering, then, well, permitting suffering is condemnable, therefore existence is condemnable. And if you remove the first one, the whole thing collapses. This is Nietzsche's setup that he's playing with here. The reproach was that existence included a consciousness that made existence condemnable. It's, again, staying with that same contradiction that he's playing with. It is, yeah, exactly. It's the very thing to turn life against itself. This is this is what we're doing. And it's, I mean, Nietzsche's awesome, but it's a really great phrasing for that. And we're going to go right to Klossowski's explanation of it, which we'll then go through because he explains it nicely. For Nietzsche, then, there would be an end, the unconscious life, because there would be a means, which would be consciousness. This is the point we must emphasize here. Does this mean that it would be sufficient to treat consciousness as a tool that the unconscious uses in order to stop being insignificant? Or rather, was it not consciousness itself, which until Nietzsche had been posited erroneously as the supreme end, that had compelled Nietzsche toward the unconscious, and therefore bad, life, compelled him to make absurdity the primary attribute of the authentic? This would mean institutional language, the code of everyday signs, does not allow us to designate what is authentic otherwise than as something insignificant. This is going to be a fucking discussion. So If Nietzsche makes consciousness the means to unconscious life as end, he's inverted the traditional hierarchy, but preserved the form of it, right? This is the thing he's played with here. Does this mean that it would be sufficient to treat consciousness as a tool the unconscious uses in order to stop being insignificant? Because if unconscious life uses consciousness to become significant, well, then the unconscious is goal-oriented in some capacity, right? It's not unconscious as character. Significance would still be a standard here, but it would be moved to another position. And at that point, you're basically back to measuring things by conscious values of significance or insignificance. The unconscious would be using consciousness the way that Schopenhauer, for example, has will use representation. It's instrumental in the whole thing, and it's smuggled in throughout it. It's played with, and that's, again, I mean, Klossowski's intentionally doing this. He's playing with this up front and making those comments because to him, he says, or rather, was it not consciousness itself, which until Nietzsche had been posited erroneously as the supreme end, that had compelled Nietzsche toward the unconscious and therefore bad life? So Nietzsche's privileging of the unconscious is actually a reactive move, according to Klossowski. Which, if you've read a lot of Nietzsche, is like this stuff, like, I really like it. It kind of is one of those like, oh, that makes sense and kind of hurts my brain a little. I don't know about you, August, but it's like, oh, wait. So Nietzsche, who was ill and having these conditions, he actually privileged the unconscious, but he's doing so himself reactively, the way that the will to power created consciousness reactively. And he reactively determined consciousness's prior false elevation to this position. So he's actually creating a dialectical opposition within the very frameworks he's trying to escape. Which is a hell of a fucking critique.
A reactive force, as Deleuze said, a reactive force can be turned to active force. But there is some kind of like things, like active force can be turned to reactive force, right? And this reactive force dialectically, I don't know, Nietzschean dialectics, although like at the end of the book in Nietzsche, I advise you to read Nietzsche on like, I advise everybody to read Deleuze on Nietzsche, right? And philosophy. It's a very good book. It's a very good book, especially the end of conclusion.
Very good book. And so Klossowski's critique of Nietzsche here is actually making Nietzsche more Nietzsche than Nietzsche, which is awesome. And that's what these guys did. It's kind of like a bunch of these guys just did this, because that next line that finishes that thought where he says, and compelled him, Nietzsche, to make absurdity the primary attribute of the authentic. This is crazy deep cuts into like a whole bunch of different people around Nietzsche. But basically, if consciousness, right, which is the rational, meaningful things that we're aware of in the intellectualization of things, the rationalizations of things, are meaningful in tradition, then the authentic unconscious life must be irrational and absurd. But absurdity is a value term specifically that is meaningful only from the perspective of consciousness, right? So the unconscious doesn't experience itself as absurd. It doesn't experience itself as anything. That's not the setup. So again, Nietzsche's playing in these same categories and almost trapped inside of them while trying to think about consciousness.
I think that there are times that Nietzsche kind of doubles back on this and is a little bit more self-critical of this process, but I generally agree. Yeah.
Yeah, no, well, don't worry. We're getting there because Klossowski is going to bring it all the way around, because this is, I brought up Kant earlier. This would be similar to how Kant was trying to think the noumenon, right? This idea of something that exceeds conceptuality, but using concepts to do it. It's Deleuze talks about this in his book on Kant. Like, there's a lot of stuff where you have these sort of auto-critiques built into the way these guys think or what these guys are saying or how they talk about these things. And that, Nietzscheing in a Nietzschean way, and Klossowski doing Nietzsche in a Nietzschean way. And it's a really crazy sort of twist. And that's this last line. And that's where the next paragraph's going to do it, but this is, you can see it coming together. This would mean institutional language, the code of everyday signs, does not allow us to designate what is authentic otherwise than as something insignificant. So, language that we use only registers the unconscious or the authentic as negation, insignificant, irrational, absurd. Absurd, if you didn't know, is actually a combinative word. It doesn't just mean it's abnormal, non, comes from that, absurd. The prefixes within these things give rise to this, give a sort of visible lie to the way language fails to positively designate the things that exceed it. Right? This is post-structuralism before people even knew what that was a fucking term. Like this was like structuralism before it was even a term. That Nietzsche's writing about this prior to like 1890 is fucking crazy. But this is the argument that Klossowski's making, that at this point, language itself sort of constitutes intelligibility. Anything that is not language is unintelligible. It is privation. That
You're
thing
putting signification into it. You're already sort of putting it within the conscious process.
Yes. As Lacan says, language comes all at once. Like that you're there, and that's where you're at. And so the authentic ends up in this place of being forced into almost a negative determination, because a positive determination is inscribed in code. And as being inscribed, it is no longer authentic. It is a simulacrum. So, like, language itself is built into this catch-22. And the language that is super important here as we get going. And Klossowski, in the French, and then again, this is why Dan Smith's translation is so important if you're reading this, he doesn't add words accidentally. So, when he talks about institutional language, we may pass by that phrase, but in the original French, the institutional is a big deal. The power structure is important here. Very important here. It's just important. Institutional there's a reason he's using that term. I just don't want to make sure I point that out as a thing. But it's a hell of a turn. It's a hell of a switch. And we've got a little bit to go here, but there's a lot that's coming out. And this is, again, this completely is gonna, fuck. I mean, even as I'm reading it right now, it's rearranging my understanding of so much Nietzsche. It's fucking crazy. So we go forward. How then can we affirm the authenticity of life in an intelligible manner? When Nietzsche borrowed the terms means and end from language, he was paying tribute to the valorization of language. For although he knew that meaning and goal are mere fictions, as are the ego, really? No, fuck you, computer. As are the ego, identity, duration, and willing, it was nonetheless through these same designations that he agreed to speak in favor of an end. Neither chaos nor the eternal return pursue any end other than themselves, and of the means he was putting forward, which were capable of being willed. But wait, we're being told this is in language. How can we get outside of language? That's exactly, we'll get there because we can. And that's Klossowski fucking nails it. Klossowski nails it and says so much in such a short book Well, don't worry, we're getting there. But yeah, it's a really fun little problem. And it's a hell of an argument. It's one I'd love to hear other solutions for besides what Klossowski or Deleuze put forward for it. Because it's a big one. So, how then can we affirm the authenticity of life in an intelligible manner? There's this important specific words here. How can we affirm the authenticity of life in an intelligible manner? This is the question. How then can we talk about the thing that we cannot speak of in language and do so in language? It sounds paradoxical. And the sentence sort of implies we can't, but he's gonna give us an answer, right? He's gonna give us an answer. When Nietzsche borrowed the terms, here's how he's doing it too. When Nietzsche borrowed the terms means and end from language, he was paying tribute to the valorization of language. This is not saying Nietzsche's trapped in language. There's a phrasing here. He's paying tribute to the valorization of language. For Klossowski, I don't know how else to say this, how I'm reading this, so feel free to tell me if I'm fucked up. But I would say and argue that this is Klossowski saying that Nietzsche is honoring language. He's recognizing, and I don't want to say prostrating himself in front of it, but he's recognizing the authority of language, even as he knows that it's falsifying what he's talking about. This is like the most Kafkaesque philosophy that exists. Right? Like, I don't know. This is, and I don't get to use Kafkaesque a lot. This is a correct use of it. I don't think I've ever been able to use it before. He is honoring it. He's paying tribute to the valorization of language. For although he knew that meaning and goal are mere fictions, as are the ego, identity, duration, and willing, these aren't random examples picked out here. He knows that these things are fictions. The blankets, right? The blankets he talked of before, the protective fictions, I think was the phrase that I've seen it translated for Nietzsche. These things that are coming out here, these aren't random words. He's not saying like dog or cat. He's talking about things about agency, like words that, why does my mouse keep doing that? He's talking about things that sort of play into that agency or that self-persistence or that thing. Nietzsche's aware that he has to utilize these fictions to communicate his critique of them and step outside of them. And this is, for me, it's a hell of a statement. And it's where this gets interesting. Because he goes on. It was nonetheless through these same designations he agreed to speak in favor of an end. The wording is so particular. Nietzsche knows he's using these fictions. He chooses to use them anyway for those reasons. We could say maybe it's hypocrisy. Maybe it's pragmatic necessity. Or maybe it's a performative demonstration of how we cannot avoid fictions. Because he's in favor of an end. En faveur de. He's not describing an end. He's advocating for one. In favor of. There's particular wording here for Klossowski. And the dude's like a crazy writer. Like, I'm really, the words she's using are very specific. And it's a really, if we rethink and are thinking of Nietzsche as being this sort of, maybe more performative. The limits of my language are the limits of my world. Or is there a way to utilize language to mean something beyond that? Which is kind of the question we're going to be asking. In parentheses, neither chaos nor the return of return pursue any other end than themselves. these are the two positive concepts we end up with after Nietzsche critiques, right? He has his chaos, which I like to use the word chaosmosis, the purposeless multiplicity of impulses, forces, things, stuff, partial objects, whatever. And the other side, we have the eternal return, the eternal recurrence, the vicious circle, the self-identical recurrence that has no telos. There's no telos in that, right? And these things that he's come up with are positive, and they have ends. They do not have ends. They exist in a slightly different way. And just to continue the sentence, and of the means he was putting forward, which were capable of being willed. Okay, so Nietzsche proposes means that are capable of being willed, which is, we've talked about there's no willing, but wait, there is willing. He's pulling willing back out here. It's willing, but it's a fiction, right? That's what we just, willing was in quotes. It's the fiction that Nietzsche's pulling up here. That even if metaphysical will, the free choice, agency, all that other shit, right, is fiction, it's actually possible to have deliberation or commitment at a practical level. It is a weird reading of Nietzsche, but it is a passivity to these and a performativity that is being brought out here that is overpowering it at a big level. Okay? Is everyone following so far? We've got like 2 paragraphs to get through before this starts to make sense, I think. But I just want to make sure because this is like where we're seeing the critique, the auto-critique of Nietzsche come through, and it's a lot.
Just I want to mention that in Human All to Human Part 1, Nietzsche talked about how for the future we maybe will have like, learning language is useful, right? It's useful thing, but maybe we will kind of like divulge, right? Or like in future to understand each other and to kind of like have one language. He did it in some odd way. It's kind of like predicting the future. Right? In Human All to Human. Maybe we'll speak one language, right? Someday, I guess.
Yeah. Anyone else? Let me check. I haven't looked at Discord chat. Excellent. It's a hell of a fucking reading. I fucking love this. It's a hell of a book. I highly recommend it. It's worth every time I go through it, every time I read something new, it's just like, it feels expanding. Planet for Weirdos, what do you mean beyond words and language? Well, that's what we're going to be talking about. The unconscious, maybe. Maybe a something in there. Maybe something else. We'll get to it. It's going to be weird. To continue reading. Does this mean that Nietzsche thought of consciousness as the means to an end that would lie in the so-called unconscious life? What was the point of denouncing consciousness as an aim that had hitherto been erroneous, inasmuch as it had usurped the authentic state of existence, making us pessimistic toward it? It is a question here of a direct attack on the necessity of language. For even though language is the usurper, it never allows us to speak of our unintelligible depth except by ascribing to what is neither thought, nor said, nor willed, a meaning and an aim that we think according to language. And even if it were the inverse of a meaning or a thought-out aim, this inversion would still be, from the perspective of consciousness, a play of language. This is continuing more or less the central question that consciousness must be articulated through consciousness. Unconsciousness must be articulated through consciousness. This is continuing that, and he opens here, I think, with the great line. Does this mean that Nietzsche thought of consciousness as the means to an end that would lie in the so-called unconscious life? so-called unconscious life is so great. Klossowski is doing this review of Nietzsche post-Freud, even post some Lacan, and he's being very specific with the so-called unconscious life, the skepticism of those categories as we've been through, as he already laid out. The idea that Nietzsche is explicitly rejecting teleology in organic processes, right? All of this comes together with the question that is also a Nietzschean question about Nietzsche. Again, Nietzsche outdoing Nietzsche in a Nietzschean way. It is about interrogating, not inserting, not asserting or inserting yourself or making specific claims. It is about the openness of interrogation. And he goes on, what was the point of denouncing consciousness as an aim that had hitherto been erroneous, inasmuch as it had usurped the authentic state of existence, making us pessimistic towards us? Consciousness isn't just some passive thing either. Here he's talking about how Nietzsche, and I think it's fair, and Nietzsche talked about it as being this thing that usurps, right? It is a illegitimate seizure of power and control. Consciousness for Nietzsche emerges historically as dominant, but it wasn't a priori. It's not an original thing. The thing he's playing here, and the reason, like Nietzsche talks about pessimism, for example, and all this other stuff, consciousness, by creating distance from the immediacy or immanence of our life, generates the conditions for negation. This is the thing that they're talking about here, that by having that distance, by having our consciousness exist in the way that it does as we understand it, as it does historically as dominant, creates that gap, creates that break. And this is the German idealist tradition, right? Where people are trying to figure out exactly how to get back to authenticity or the authentic state or the true self or all this other shit. And this is, as Klossowski, the French tradition in comparison, it's an erroneous aim. No, consciousness is mistakenly, again, posited as the telos of human development, the center of it, the thing that makes it, the a priori reality. And it isn't that. Instead, as he says, it is a question here of a direct attack on the necessity of language. For even though language is the usurper, it never allows us to speak of our depth. That phrasing, for even though language, that's just a great fucking phrasing. God damn it. Nietzsche has a line that I have in my notes a bunch that Klossowski brings up a few times. It says, writing in his notes and his letters to Overbeck, he says, my life consists now in the wish that all things be different from my comprehension of them. That's so fucking, like, what a fucking amazing sentence. The way that language operates and works, it isn't just representing whatever's coming. It's not just like usurping and taking over and representing everything. Language is the usurpation itself. It doesn't let us speak of our depth. Language blocks the unconscious from being able to be expressed because it necessarily can't be reached by language. It doesn't work this way. It's a really, man, that fucking line to Overbeck just sticks with me forever. It says, even in his time, Nietzsche thought French God in ways his German contemporaries never could. Probably still can't, mostly, to be frank. Just saying, I've read a lot of them Germans these days. I like some of them, but yeah, I think Nietzsche's tradition continued outside of his motherland. But he goes on to say, except by ascribing to what is neither thought nor said, what is neither thought nor said nor willed, a meaning and an aim that we think according to language. We tend to think of consciousness as being, and the phrasing is thought, said, or willed. We tend to think of it as cognition, communication, and agency, will, volition, choice. We tend to think of these things, this setup, right? And we ascribe to these things a meaning and a name we think according to language. All of these things are necessarily built by the structures of linguistics. They're not primary to them, and then language finds a way. We think according to language. Yes? LJ, is that you? LJ. There we go. Wasn't sure if you wanted to talk. But this is no, you're good. This is the thing. We think according to language. We tend to think that language follows thought. This is how, if you were to talk to like average person, they'll go, oh no, I think about things and then I say them. That's common sense, as you might say. Kant. You might say that, right? That language follows. But the limits of language are the limits of thought. The unconscious isn't in either of these things. There's a weird separation of them that it doesn't quite deal with it. It doesn't quite get born of that. Planet for Weirdos, like whenever you have a complex feeling or opinion of something, you can't form it yet because of lack of words. Children run into this a lot. As a parent, I've had these talks with my kids as they're learning how to describe feelings. And take it all the way down to like the most basic version. I like to use the example of hunger. What the fuck is hunger? I'm hungry. Are you hungry? You're not. There's a unique constellation of feelings that you've learned over time is hungry, but hungry doesn't cover it. You have a slight ache in your stomach in a very particular way that probably isn't the same ache that if someone kicked you in the balls, or if you had gas pains, or if you're having your appendix burst. That discomfort is a little bit different. But this discomfort is in these particular ways, and also at the same time, it's that time of day, and also blah, blah, like, no, that's not how I'm hungry is just what you jump out. Blah. And so the reason is because you have the language is sort of built into it, but a meaning and a name that we think according to language. We think also according to language. It's not just what we speak. The same limitations, the same stuff is placed. And it continues. And even if it were the inverse of a meaning or a thought out aim, this inversion would still be, from the perspective of consciousness, a play of language. So, even negation is fucked. Basically, even negation is trapped within language. Even the negation of language is trapped within language. The inverse, right, that he's playing with here is the unconscious, the life drive, death drive, Dionysian chaos, whatever. The conceiving of any of these things must remain within language, and language is an incredibly determined space. So all the work we do to talk about things beyond language, we're doing with language. Again, as we made the earlier comment, and Reflective made the earlier comment and joke, we're being told in language, can we get outside of language and think about things outside of language while using language to think about those things? And
Hegel said that language is an infection, right? Is infection. Infect the synthesis or representations of things. Synthetic representation.
Well, and Lacan and Zizek, I think his phrasing of it is almost perfect. Language comes all at once. You don't get a little bit of it. You're introduced to that, and then you're in that space where language is necessitated. and it's done. You're there. But here's the thing, just to end, the means he was, and even if it were the inverse of meaning of thought out aim, this inversion would still be, from the perspective of consciousness, a play of language. Nietzsche's actually got a solution here. The play of language, the phrasing play of language. It is not about escaping this. That is not a thing we're going to be able to do. Just so you know. No. That's not the point. Go skiz. No. Multiply perspectives. Play with style. Play with fragmentation that resists unity. That's the play of language. We can still play with these things. We can critique consciousness using consciousness's own tools by playing with them. And he means play in a very specific way, but it's a good way. And we're going to just jump straight to the next paragraph and talk through this because he doesn't fucking around when he does this. Before I go, any last notes or anything? Because I'm happy to. Otherwise, I'm just going to go to this next paragraph, and then we're going to read a Nietzsche quote after that follows this up. Good. Means and end still remain within the perspective of consciousness. To use conscious categories as a means to attain an end outside consciousness is still to remain subordinate to the false perspective of consciousness. A consciousness that would be conscious of being an instrument of chaos would no longer be capable of obeying the aim of a chaos that would not even ask it to pursue such an aim. Chaos, in turn, would then be conscious and would no longer be chaos. The terms conscious and unconscious are therefore applicable to nothing that is real. If Nietzsche made use of them, it was only as a psychological convention, but he nonetheless let us hear what he did not say, namely, that the act of thinking corresponds to a passivity, and that this passivity is grounded in the fixity of the signs of language, whose combinations simulate gestures and movements that reduce language to silence. Okay?
Different in repetition.
I mean, there's a lot here, but yes.
Difference in repetition. The passive synthesis. Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot happening here. And the next little bit that is part of this is there's a lot of Nietzsche. So we're just going to go straight into how Nietzsche did this and how Nietzsche talked about this, and you're just going to be jumping along with me, hopefully. Every movement should be conceived as a gesture, a kind of language in which impulsive forces make themselves heard. In the inorganic world, there is no misunderstanding. Communication seems to be perfect. Error begins in the organic world. Things, substances, qualities, activities. We must guard against their projection into the inorganic world. These are errors of species through which organisms live. The problem of the possibility of error? The contradiction is not between the false and the true, but between the abbreviations of signs and the signs themselves. The essential point: the creation of forms, which represent numerous movements, the invention of signs for all types of signs. All movements are signs of an inner event. Every inner movement is expressed by such modifications of forms. Thought is not yet the inner event itself, but only a semiotic corresponding to the compensation of the power of the affects. The humanization of nature, interpretation according to we others. Really, really like it a lot. I like it a lot. To keep reading. From each of our fundamental impulses comes a perspectival appreciation of every event, every lived experience. Each of these impulses is hindered or favored or flattened by every other impulse. each with its own formative law, risings and fallings, its own rhythm, etc. And one impulse dies when another one arises. Man is a plurality of wills to power, each with a plurality of means and forms of expression. The different so-called passions, for example, man is cruel, are only fictive unities, insofar as what enters consciousness as similar from different fundamental impulses is synthetically imagined as a being, an essence, or a faculty, a passion, just as the soul itself is an expression for all the phenomena of consciousness. But we interpret it as the cause of all these phenomena. Self-consciousness is a fiction. Man, Nietzsche's good. Nietzsche's good. Just so good. I kind of don't want to do analysis on this because it's just that great. It just stands alone. Does anyone disagree that this stands pretty well alone for the most part? Needs a sound effect. Fair enough. Need a big womp womp. Yeah, we're just going to keep going. We're going to go right to Klossowski's response here, which is really, really tight. And it's broken up in little bits intentionally. From this point of view, the first question we must ask concerns the function of the signs of language, or rather, in an even more rudimentary fashion, how and where are signs born? So this is a big shift and a big important thing he wants to talk about, because we just went through a whole bunch of Nietzschean stuff backing up what he was just saying. And now the question is to interrogate the emergence of signs themselves. Every movement should be conceived as a gesture, a kind of language in which impulsive forces make themselves heard. In the inorganic world, there is no misunderstanding. Communication seems to be perfect. Error begins in the organic world. He's quoting Nietzsche right there. He's just quoting. That's just quoting. And what Nietzsche's talking about here is, to say another way, without language, the inorganic world, without full organisms, total bodies, communication seems perfect. Again, don't think organic and natural. These words in English have gotten so fucking backwards and all of that shit. I'm pretty sure this is from Will to Power, by the way. It might be. It's hard to know. Nietzsche's great. But I think this is, yeah. Klossowski responds, in the organic, fucking mouse, stop it, mouse. In the inorganic world, communication seems perfect. Nietzsche means there is no possible disagreement between what is strong and what is weak. Every power draws its ultimate consequences every moment, he says elsewhere. Persuasion is immediate. Relations of things are executed without mediation. The line here, there is no possible disagreement between what is strong and what is weak. Strong overcomes the weak. The stronger force wins. That's it. It's done. It just happens. We, however, have a different thing. He's not talking about totalized people as being weaker or stronger and the stronger should crush them. That's not what he's saying. He's saying that there's this really weird way that disagreements happen here with where we're at. There is a gap between the pure force of the thing and the effect. There is resistance. There is interpretation. right? The phrase that he pulls from in this sentence, every power draws its ultimate consequence at every moment, is talking about like there is a necessity of things locally, but it is grounded in kind of compulsion and impulses and sort of these forces, not about inference. This isn't about inference. Persuasion is immediate. He's making it's a sly comment. Persuasion is immediate. You're persuaded, you're attracted, you're pushed in a direction, forces overcome other forces, and things go to the next step. When you see birds that are doing their mating calls, they're not thinking, oh, yes, well, this nest is slightly nicer, but Stephen once told me a nice story. Like, it's like, yep, nope, yep, nope, and that's it. And the forces are consumed almost basically immediately, to put it nicely, I think. Yeah. In the organic world, by contrast, where exchange and assimilation are necessary, misunderstandings become possible, since exchange and assimilation take place only through interpretation. Trial, error, certainty, the certainty of the conditions of existence. Man, that's great. We mediate everything. Organisms mediate shit all the time, through communication, through whatever the fuck else. Like, we don't deal with things in terms of like the direct force of X, Y, or Z. That's not really what we do or how things are sort of set up. Sorry, 2 seconds. All right. I mean, I maybe I can't even add to that, really. A rock rolling downhill doesn't err because it doesn't interpret the hill. It's not deciding and thinking about the forces. It's just doing it. But organisms have to interpret. We have to interpret. And that's the phrasing here. The latter can be obtained only after long experimentation with the similar and dissimilar, and thus with identity. Only then can points of reference, repetition, and comparison appear, and finally, comparable signs. So if you want to talk about difference and repetition, this is it. This is the genesis of identity, basically. The similar to dissimilar, thus with identity, only then can you produce points of reference. This is organisms build and construct an understanding of things through repeated successful interactions. That's it. Identity is not some eternal form that's sort of discovered or pulled out of things. That's not the setup here. This is the opposite. We fabricate identity through stabilization of time and things. Yeah, right? So an ant will try to pick up sand, or it'll try to eat something, or it'll go after a thing. It'll do similar to similar, and it will over time build these things. It will have reference points, and then those reference points become recognition of repetition of those points. And then we have comparison of those points with the points of another thing, and then that turns into signs, and signs both basically become the culmination of all of this over time. And that's the phrasing. And only then can points of reference, repetition, and comparison appear. And finally, comparable signs. Signs you can compare, but those things require an establishment of equivalence, of categorization of class, right? And this is the genesis of language and semiotics, as Nietzsche's talking about it. This is signification that's basically built on a very, very flimsy scaffolding of sense-making processes through time. Yeah, that's probably how I'd phrase that.
And when we talk about time, we don't talking about in sort of Kantian time. where time is a manifold, but we're talking about time within kind of like a Bergsonian kind of time, right?
Within a temporal time. Yeah, the way that things
exactly.
get layered in time. Yes. Yeah, I'd probably phrase it that way, yeah. So to continue with Klossowski, because I think we can just keep pushing a little bit. There's some really good, let me see. Yeah. We're going to be getting closer to where I kind of want to take a break because I want to be able to bust through. We're getting close. Next week we're going to finish out chapter 2. Today we're just going to do the next page after this, and then we'll probably take a break. Because I want to make sure that we get a really good amount of time for the next little bit. But to continue. Now, in a universe dominated by the inorganic, organic life is itself a fortuitous case, hence a possible error in the cosmic economy. It is within this economy that interpretation, grounded in the fear of error, becomes susceptible to error. Even if the origin of organic life lies in purely random combinations, it can no longer behave randomly, since once it comes into existence, it must believe in its necessity, and therefore it must maintain the conditions of its existence. To do so, it must avoid chance, not commit errors. Hence the double aspect of error in Nietzsche. Life depends on an illusion, its own necessity, whence the verdict, truth is the kind of error without which a certain species of life could not live. So good. So yes, this is also not saying get rid of the necessity of things or that this is just the setup. If life comes about through chaos, but it shows up and it's able to see this, in it has to be built the desire to stay alive. Like this is the desire to do this. It must believe in the necessity of itself. And as such, it must maintain the conditions of its existence. Chance becomes terrifying. Errors become death. And so there's this odd way that error plays. Life depends on the illusion of its own necessity at the same time. It's kind of a huge, fucking crazy statement. This is, again, upending Kant, Aristotle, all that shit. This sort of idea that life is nature's truth or highest expression. For Nietzsche, let's say life is a cosmic accident. Klossowski too. If it's a cosmic accident, that doesn't mean it doesn't have a necessity of itself. It is not privileged. It is actually not necessary, but it must believe in that. It must believe in that. That's part of the way that it sort of comes about. It must believe in that. And that phrasing I just fucking love. I just love that phrasing. So yeah, to say another way for the people who care about epistemological truths, you could say that life must actually accept or even commit epistemic errors to persist. It must have false regulations or the false understanding of what is normal or the false understanding of itself as necessary. These are not sequential elements. It is simultaneously happening. Life is erroneous at every register in its own weird way, because that's the nature of being a contingent sort of existence. The beauty of it, actually, this is if there's like the positive nihilism of Nietzsche, it comes through in this, and I fucking adore it. What we call truth is the subset of errors that proved adaptive for life. Truth is defined functionally. It is not about the epistemological categories of these things. It is the opposite of a pragmatic, opposite of a realist perspective. And the phrasing that he uses here, the quote from Nietzsche, truth is the kind of error without which a certain species of life could not live. He's not referring to all life. Again, he's being very specific, and I think I would read it as him aiming at humans. Maybe we're human, all too human, as an example of a quote. But that thing that he's aiming at is, hey, truth is the error without which humans would not live. So there's it's pretty fun. It's a pretty fun little way to talk about it. I think it's a pretty fun little way to talk about it. And as you make your way talking about it, because Nietzsche, and this is where Klossowski's going with this, as Nietzsche spent his time, he started really diving into chance, and he really liked chance. And a lot of thinkers after him also really liked chance, but chance is like, well, you just said truth. You just said truth is necessary. And that's kind of we have to keep that. Let it tarry in our minds. It's the point of the dialectic, for God's sake. It's the whole point of thought is that we can hold contradictory opinions. He happened to like chance. By chance, he liked chance, August. So you missed by necessity, he happened to like chance. Terrible lie. That's the joke. That's the joke. I know, but it wasn't delivered well. So that's the joke. Hello, Brett. How are you doing? So we continue. Now, let us retain this complex in Nietzsche's thought formed by chance, error, and the interpretation of the conditions of existence, the illusion of their necessity, as well as the necessity of their illusion. Enjoy the paradox. Let it sit with you. That's all he's saying. He's like, hey, just let it sit. Just let it sit. Just keep it there. Just keep it there. Let's hang out. Hang out with that. Just let it. It's a passenger along for the ride. Keep it with us. If interpretation is susceptible to error, whence the possibility of misunderstanding at the highest degree of organic life, namely the human species, for which truth is an error without which it cannot live, then a code must be developed, the most evolved code of interpretation. Humans are not just another organism. There is a really interesting thing that you can talk to about us as things. We have evolved this wild code of interpretation, where maybe this apex of complexity with interpretation and the apex of mistakes also. There's the phrasing he's using here is must be developed. There's a phrase, it's really fantastic. A code must be developed, the most evolved code of interpretation. And the more complex the organism, the more elaborate the interpretive apparatus, the greater the dependence on systematic falsification, and therefore also the most prone to error, but also the most dependent on truth that it is. Boop, 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 boop. I wonder if we're starting to see where he's going with this. What is this code of signs? An abbreviation of the impulsive movements of gestures in signs. No doubt the system of interpretation that offers the largest domain of errors. I actually want to stop and think about this one for a second. The code of signs is an abbreviation of the impulsive movements of gestures in signs. No doubt the system of interpretation offers the largest domain of error. It's an abbreviation of the impulsive movements of gestures in signs. Abbreviation implies efficiencies. These codes are a shortened, efficient version of the impulsive remember, unspeakable, unconscious movements of gestures within signs. That's what the code of signs is. Not the signs, the code of signs. Okay? The way we compress bodily gestures and activities into arbitrary symbols. Okay? So we have our impulsive movement. A grunt, moving my left arm, turning my head, nodding, whatever, becomes a expressive gesture. And this gets turned into a conventional sign, but this is not fully what we're talking about. It's about the code of signs. And that distance from that sign to the original impulse is pretty significant and arbitrary. And that system of interpretation offers the largest domain of error. The language doesn't transparently convey what it's talking about. It can't. If I say the word dog, you know it because you've been taught the word dog. But a detective who was given a dictionary and I say the word dog, how would they match it? Where would they even start? How would they even know what the fuck I'm talking about without knowing all the structures and all the setup and the distance they'd have to go? Okay, well, that's dog. Okay, it starts with, what letter was that? That starts with D. Okay, start with D. Let's look at the D's. Okay, the second, find it. Okay, this. So it's a canine. Let me look up. And it's reference, all the way down. All the way down. That this is not transparently conveying one's thoughts. It is instead interpreting pre-linguistic impulses, and speaking is interpreting itself. There are no raw experiences that ever get put into words. That's not how things work. Words constitute the experience as we communicate, but they're doing so by distorting it by its own rules, by the way it works. That's how I'd phrase it. Nietzsche does not admit the existence of a power that would be unable to increase itself. This is it is this incessant augmentation that makes him say that it is not simply power, but will to power. The term will zur Macht, however, indicates an intention, a tendency towards something he's declared to be a fiction of language. A perpetual equivocity ensues, despite all his efforts to distinguish his own use of the term from the traditional concept of the will. Again, playing specifically at, I think, a very easy Nietzschean critique that I've heard others make. It's a solid one, where it's like, hey, will is like a direction, and something a subject does. A subject wills, it has agency, it has volition, which is, and tensionality, zur, is like toward, the will toward power, as if it's partial to it. That would mean that it's kind of directed. It's kind of weird, because he says there's no such thing as will like itself. There is no willing, but only willing something. But he uses this term, will zur Macht, the will toward power, the will toward overcoming. And it's because language is inadequate for this. Language doesn't work for this. It's actually funny, like German language, and he'll be getting into this like shortly as he's going, but because we've had these discussions with Germans, that, like, German language grammar, the way the language is set up, requires like that setup of subject, verb, object. And Nietzsche needs something that collapses subject and predicate, like will is power or not will seeks power. But the language is like fucked up for that. Like there's this perpetual equivocity, which is another really sort of fun thing. Every time Nietzsche is writing will to power, you are building these connotations that he's trying to expel inside of it. That the term is there out of necessity, because of how communication functions, especially the German language which he's writing in, but also totally lies and misleading because the grammatical structure basically creates the necessity for falsification. Yeah. Nietzsche is creating philosophy about how language fucks with philosophy while using language to build the philosophy to do it. Yes. We cannot cognize except as will. As soon as we try to imagine a power that's already got will within it, this is the challenge of language and the sort of creation of these situations. And that's where Klossowski goes. Nietzsche finds this will to power, energy in the quantitative sense of physics, as much as in the inorganic world as in the organic world, where he then assimilates it totally to what he himself calls an impulse. From the lowest level of organic life to the human species, this impulse is ramified, spiritualized, and persists both beyond and before the organs the impulses have created. See any language? The same thing occurs at the level of the human psyche, where the impulses are subject not only to a diversification, but to a total inversion by the cerebral organ, which they have worked together to form as their supreme obstacle. It's, hello, Anti-Oedipus, how are you doing? Hi, Deleuze. Glad we had those talks. Like, anyone else see the language here as being like, Jesus Christ? More than a little bit. Skull Knight says that's why some philosophers invented their own philosophical terminology to escape this. Deleuze being an example of that, and Klossowski as well. And that's, I think what Klossowski's doing here is bringing Nietzsche up through that tradition. And Nietzsche tried, but again, he was doing it, and it's a deeply, as Klossowski's reading, Nietzsche is deeply performative in what he's writing, and he's very, very self-aware throughout it. And so it's a hell of a thing. And that's the line here. The same thing occurs at the level of human psyche, where the impulses are subject not only to diversification, but a total inversion by the cerebral organ, which they have worked together to form as their supreme obstacle. The comedic tragedy of consciousness is that humans create consciousness, and that then is turned to, they create their worst enemy. Like this is straight up Nietzsche. This is like super Nietzsche. But because like, hey, we're going to have consciousness and here's how it works. Great. We've invented it. And also it turns back against us almost immediately. It's because of reactive forces. Yes, exactly, August. The psyche isn't liberation from instinct. It is instinct's self-betrayal, more or less. Differentiation is a word for it. This would be like, I want to say like in the Derridian sense, because differentiation versus like with a C instead of a T. But also diversification, multiplication. Humans tend to have more finer grained drives than very simple organisms. There's a lot of complex fucking things going on here. But the inversion of the psyche that happens is those drives almost become anti-drives. That consciousness evaluates, judges, inhibits, reacts upon the very impulses that produced itself. And that's the phrasing in which they have worked together to form as their supreme obstacle. That's the phrasing here. This is the sort of a really bleak upfront thing, which is fine. This is the Christian morality, ascetic resentment bullshit that Nietzsche is rallying against. This is not some imposition placed from outside into us. This is self-imposed, created obstacles by the forces themselves. The unconsciousness created consciousness to fuck with itself. Life turned against itself by being refined. This is bad conscience. Bad conscience. Bad conscience. I need to pronounce that better. Much better. Much better. Just terrible. It's terrible. We're going to keep going. Fuck it. We're going to keep going. I got a couple of stuff. I got to get to, we're going to do one more paragraph, I think. We'll do the bottom paragraph here, and then we'll be done for the day, because I've got Operation Inflation's going extremely well, and it's been horrifying and wonderful, and way more work than any of us expected. So it's a lot. It's a lot. But we'll keep going for right now. On one side of the obstacle, represented by the cerebral function as intellect, the impulses are sometimes in league with each other, and sometimes opposed to each other in a perpetual combat. On the other side, they submit to a deforming duplication by being designated. Now, Nietzsche insists on the fact that the combat of the impulses takes place through a mutual interpretation of their respective intensities, which implies their own code. So, Nietzsche talked about the body being the battlefield, like the mind and brain battlefield of the impulses, the forces, the passions, the phrasings of these things. This is the setup of it. I mean, this is, hello, Anti-Oedipus. Like, it's just, fuck. It's so fucking Anti-Oedipus. It's crazy to me how much it's just Deleuze and Klossowski just so much. Because what we have is, on one side of the obstacle, represented by the cerebral function as intellect. So we have this obstacle, the brain. The impulses are sometimes in league with each other, sometimes opposed to each other in combat. The impulses do their thing. Sometimes they're in agreement, pushing in the same direction, force in the same. Otherwise, canceling each other out in combat. On the other side, after the obstacle, just whoop, they slam into the brain. And then on the other side, they submit to this deforming duplication by being designated. Hungry, sad, happy, lustful, horny, gooner, Republican, pedophile. Sorry, that's just where my brain goes with those connections. That thing that happens designates. And Nietzsche insists on the fact that the combat of the impulses takes place through a mutual interpretation of their respective intensities, which implies their own code. That last bit is going to be the thing that is going to carry us through the end of this chapter. This is not a linguistic code. Okay? This is not a linguistic code. Remember the code of the signs we talked about a moment ago? It's the things that empower that. This is different. This is analogous to that, ish, sure. But what is pre-linguistic code? Non-linguistic code, alinguistic, ablinguistic, whatever the fuck word you want to do. But like that thing we're talking about here, the combat of the impulses takes place through mutual interpretation of their respective intensities, which means they have their own code. The forces and impulses have their own code, not their own signs, their own code. The fuck? That's the thing. All of this stuff that we are, the respective intensities, the phrasing, like this is, I don't know. I didn't read this originally in Nietzsche. I feel stupid if maybe everyone else did. That's fine. But this is like, the phrasing here is so fucking incisive. Nietzsche does talk about this. The body, these things are coming together. Well, wait, if they're doing this, if they're coming together, if these intensities are flattening each other, destroying each other, whatever, the strength differentials, the gradients of force, the drives encounter other drives, and something is stronger or weaker. Something's on the ascent. Something's on the descent. Are these my allies? Are these forces alongside me? Nietzsche talks about all of these things. He doesn't anthropomorphize like I'm doing, but this assessment of how the forces come together happens below consciousness. This is the unconscious. We don't deliberate or consider if hunger is the thing that wins. If you've ever really been hungry, it beats everything. If you've ever taken ecstasy, horniness defeats everything. If you've ever taken, like, there are things that you don't sit around and go, yes, I think thirst would be wonderful to feel right now. That's the thing that I should be. No, you're just really thirsty and you can't get out of your head. Itchiness, needing to take a shit. There are things that just win. How? How the fuck does this happen? Because we don't deliberate about whether that happens. In Nietzsche's words, these forces negotiate. They negotiate themselves, which would mean they have a code. It didn't occur to me before. Didn't occur to me as a thing to think about. Nietzsche basically wrote Anti-Oedipus without knowing it, yes. And Klossowski is the third member of the Anti-Oedipus gang. Like, this is so screaming out Anti-Oedipus, it's fucking wild. But this is the thing that is important as we go forward. The impulses have their own code. Nietzsche's implied it throughout. We just read the passages. Now Nietzsche insists on the fact that a combat of the impulses takes place through a mutual interpretation of their respective intensities, which implies their own code. And that's where we're going to end today, because that's like the big fucking crazy thing for this. It's a lot, and it's wonderful. And with that, I'm going to say, hey, this has been wonderful. I am going to see if I can get an emote made, Operation Inflation emote. We'll do that. That sounds great. This is a highlight of my week. Fucking this book is so good, and reading this shit and being forced to think about it. Love it. I hope it was as good for you as it was for me. And if it wasn't, you can come and join Discord and yell at me anytime. Discord.gg/DGQC. Join live. Tell me why I'm stupid. Disagree with me. Elevate my understanding of these things, please, dear God. If not, that's fine. You can support us without joining by heading over to Patreon, patreon.com/DGQC, and give a cup of coffee a month. $5, $10, $20 a month. May not be much to you. If it is, don't give it. If it isn't, yeah, do give it, because every dollar helps. And of course, you can head to operationinflation.com and see what the fuck I'm up to in my spare time now, because this is becoming quickly a full-time fucking job. This weekend, no Kings protest. No Kings protest is this weekend. Look up and find one near you. There is one happening everywhere. Go out. Go out. I don't care if you're scared of the outdoors or other people. Get headphones on. Do anything. Get out there, because the number of people that come out for this is going to be a huge fucking deal. And if you need, we'll be happily finding ways to supply you with big fucking inflatable costumes. And with that, I'm going to send you off to, let's see if there's anyone else online right now. It looks like Sunday will be coming up. 4:30. That's too far. God damn it. I'm not sending you to somewhere to wait for 2 hours. I don't have anyone. Yay. I'm going to send you over to, we'll send you the Surf Times. Surfs are online. Mention Operation Inflation. Just spam that motherfucker. That'll be great. And I think that'll do it. So then with that, thank you all. I'll see you all soon enough. All right. Should be clear.
Operation Inflation. Yeah.
Operation